The church door was unlocked. Still, I stood on the bottom step as if it were sealed shut. My hands wouldn't stop shaking around the envelope. Snow dusted the welcome mat as someone had already tried to cover my tracks. Inside, I could hear the piano warming up, soft, careful, like the building was holding its breath. I hadn't been here in 8 months. Not since the night they asked me to take a break from serving. Not since every face that used to smile at me suddenly learned how to look through me. I stared at the glass. My reflection stared back, chapped lips, tired eyes. A man who looked like he'd been sleeping in corners. A man who used to believe that God finishes what he starts. I lifted my hand toward the handle. Then I dropped it. Because what do you do when you are sure heaven has already moved on without you? I turned away from the steps and walked down the sidewalk. The envelope pressed to my back like it could keep me warm. The air smelled like pine and car exhaust. Someone had hung Christmas lights along the fence, and half of them were burned out. The rest blinked like they were trying. I used to be the one up on a ladder, fixing things before anyone noticed they were broken. That was my whole life, really. Please fix it, patch it, make it look fine. Until the day I couldn't. My room was 2 bus rides away, in the basement of a house that always smelled like boiled cabbage. The ceiling was low enough that I could touch it with my fingertips if I stretched. The single window was half buried in snow, so the daylight came in thin and gray, like it was tired too. I sat on the edge of the mattress and set the envelope on my knees. My fingers were cracked from the cold and cheap soap, the kind of hands that used to carry lumber and tools, the kind of hands that used to lift my daughter into the air until she squealed. Now those hands held paper like it weighed 100 pounds. On the little table beside my bed there was a folded suit jacket, dark blue. The elbows were shiny from age. I'd brushed it down last night anyway, as it mattered. I looked at the phone on the table. No new messages. I typed my daughter's name into the search bar of my mind, the way people typed prayers. Lila, 8 years old. Front tooth missing. A laugh that came out like a hiccup when she was truly happy. I called her every Sunday at noon. Most Sundays I got a voicemail. Sometimes her mom answered and said, "She's busy," like childhood was a job with no breaks. Today, I didn't call. Not yet. I reached under the mattress and pulled out my little notebook. A list filled the page. The same list I rewrote every week because crossing things off was rare. Find steady work. Pay rent. Call Lila. Stay clean. Keep going. At the bottom, in my own handwriting, I had written 1 line months ago, when I still believed writing it could make it true. God is not done with me. I stared at that line until my eyes blurred. Then I shut the notebook as it had offended me. The envelope was still on my knees. I slid my thumb under the flap, then stopped. Not yet, I told myself. Not until it matters. The next morning I stood in line at the employment center, my collar turned up, my shoes still damp from walking through slush. The place was warm in the way hospitals were warm. Too bright, too clean, a smell of disinfectant and old coffee. Posters on the wall promised second chances in cheerful fonts. A young man behind the counter called names like he was reading off a menu. I watched people around me. A woman in a puffy jacket, clutching a folder. A man with paint on his fingernails. A teenager was chewing the inside of his cheek while he stared at the floor. Everybody had a reason to be there. Mine was simple. I had been a supervisor on a construction crew for 12 years. Then I made a decision that cracked everything. Not loudly, not like a storm. Like ice, one small slip. One moment I convinced myself I could fix it later. And then later came with a flashlight and paperwork and faces that didn't recognize me anymore. "Daniel H.," the young man called. I stood up too fast. My chair scraped against the floor, loud enough to turn heads. My face burning, my hands opening and closing like they didn't know where to go. I walked to the desk. The young man didn't look up right away. He clicked through screens, chewing gum slowly, like time belonged to him. "Any updates since last time?" he asked. "I can start immediately," I said. "You've been saying that," because it was still true. He slid a form toward me. "Sign here," he said, "and remember, we need full disclosure." "Full?" I nodded. I picked up the pen. My hand shook so hard my signature looked like someone else's name. When I walked back out into the cold, the wind slapped my cheeks like it was trying to wake me up. It wasn't just money that made life hard. It was being watched, being remembered, being measured by the worst thing you had done. At the grocery store, I only bought what I could carry: bread, eggs, canned soup. I counted coins at the checkout like they were fragile. My fingers hovering over a pile of change, my eyes were darting. My mouth was tight as the cashier waited. I could feel the person behind me shifting. A sigh, a tap of a boot. Pressure doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just stands close and breathes. When I walked home, my phone buzzed with an email. Not a job offer, a reminder that child support was overdue. I stared at the screen until the words stopped making sense. I used to pay on time. I used to do the right thing. And I did the right thing for a long time, until the day I didn't. That day became the headline of my life. At night, I volunteered at the shelter downtown because I couldn't stand sitting alone with my own thoughts. They let me serve soup and wipe tables and stack chairs. No one asked questions if you worked quietly. In the kitchen, steam rose from big metal pots. Someone had a radio playing low, the signal fuzzy. I wore a hairnet that made me look ridiculous, and for a moment that almost felt good, like I could be anonymous in something silly. Then a man I hadn't seen in years walked in with a tray. He froze when he saw me. His eyes flicked to my hands, to my face. Recognition. The room didn't change all at once. It changed in small ways. A pause in laughter. A glance passed like a note in school. I kept wiping the same spot on the counter until it shone, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The man leaned toward someone and whispered. I didn't hear the words. I didn't have to. My name had become a whisper. After my shift, I stood outside the shelter, pulling my gloves on with stiff fingers. The sky was the color of dirty cotton. A woman in a thin coat asked me if I had spare change. I almost laughed because the idea was so far from my life it felt like a joke. Instead, I reached into my pocket and found the last loonie I had. I placed it in her palm. Her hand was colder than mine. "Thank you," she said, and her voice cracked like she hadn't used it gently in a while. I walked away fast before my throat did something embarrassing. That night I lay in my basement room and listened to the pipes creak. Somewhere above me, someone's dog padded across the floor. I closed my eyes and tried to pray. I used to pray like I was breathing. Now it felt like talking into a disconnected phone line. I whispered anyway. God, I said, and my voice sounded unfamiliar. I don't know if you still hear me. No lightning answered. No comfort rushed in. Just silence and the sound of the heater kicking on. In the morning, I pulled on my suit jacket and went back to the church. Not for the service, for the office. The church office had a small sign that said "Hours." The letters were curling at the edges. Inside, the hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and old hymn books. My shoes squeaked on the polished floor. I stopped at the bulletin board. There were photos of smiling families, bake sale flyers, a handwritten note that said, "Please keep the doors closed to save heat. Save heat, save money, save everything." I stood in front of the pastor's door, my hand raised. My knuckles hovering, my face tight, my palms sweating inside my glove. I knocked anyway. A voice inside said, "Come in." Pastor Ewan looked up from his desk. He was in his 50s, with kind eyes that used to land on me like reassurance. He used to clap my shoulder on Sundays, call me brother, ask about my daughter. Now his smile appeared and disappeared quickly, like someone had trained it to. "Daniel," he said. "Hi," I said. He gestured to the chair across from him. I sat. The chair was the same chair I had sat in the night everything changed, the night of the meeting. I didn't mention that. I didn't mention the way the room had felt too warm, the way my own sweat had made my shirt stick to my back. I didn't mention the looks. I didn't mention the phrase, "We need to protect the church." He folded his hands on the desk. "How have you been?" he asked. It sounded polite, not curious, trying, I said. His eyes lowered to my hands. People always looked at their hands when they didn't know what to do with shame. "Are you still attending the recovery group?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded, like he was checking a box. "And work?" he asked. "I'm looking." He exhaled softly. "Daniel," he said, "we want you to know we're praying for you." My stomach tightened. Praying for you. It was what people said when they were keeping distance. "I'm not here for money," I said quickly, because that fear always hung in the air, even when no one named it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "I didn't say you were." I stared at a framed photo on his desk. A mission trip. Smiling teenagers. Bright sun. My throat burned. I started. I had come in with words planned. A small speech. Calm. Controlled. But standing there, I felt like I was 8 months old again, unable to form anything but need. "I just want to come back," I said. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "There are steps," he said carefully. "Steps," I repeated. "Yes," he said. "Time. Consistency. Trust." That word landed like a stone. I swallowed. "I'm trying," I said. He nodded again, but his face stayed guarded. "I know," he said, and then he added, softer, "but people were hurt. People, not me. Not my daughter. Not the fact that I had lost my job, my marriage, my reputation, my home. People were hurt. I didn't argue because he was right. I had hurt people too, but what I wanted to say was this: I've been hurt too, and I'm still here." Instead, I said, "Can I sit in the back on Sundays?" His jaw tightened slightly, like this was harder than it should be. "We don't want it to be distracting," he said. Distracting. That was what my presence had become. A distraction. Something that made others uncomfortable. He lifted his hands, palms up, like he was offering what he could. "Maybe for now you can watch online," he said. Online. In my basement, alone, with half the screen buffering. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, because what else could I say without sounding like a problem? I stood. He stood too, like he couldn't let the distance become too obvious. At the door, I turned back. Pastor Ewan's face looked tired, not cruel, just tired. "Daniel," he said, and his voice softened a little more. "God hasn't forgotten you. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made my eyes sting, because I didn't believe him. Not about God, about me." Outside, I walked past the sanctuary doors. Through the glass, I could see rows of empty chairs. A woman was arranging song sheets. Her hands moved quickly and practiced. She glanced up and saw me. Her smile didn't come. She looked down again. A small moment. Nothing dramatic. But I felt it like a shove. I walked out into the cold with my shoulders hunched. By the time I got home, my fingers were numb. I sat on my bed and stared at the envelope again. The flap was still sealed. I pressed it against my forehead, and for the first time in weeks I cried, not with noise, just tears slipping out like they'd been waiting for permission. My face buried in paper, my hands gripping the edges, my shoulders shaking in silence. The next few weeks moved like that. Work search, shelter shift. Recovery group, sleep, repeat. At the recovery group we sat in a circle of folding chairs under flickering fluorescent lights. There were coffee stains on the table, a box of tissues always half empty. We used first names only. No one cared what you used to be. The leader, an older man named Ron, had a voice like gravel and warmth. One night, after I shared briefly, Ron looked at me and said one sentence. "Don't confuse consequences with God quitting." I stared at the floor. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say it feels the same. Instead, I nodded like a man taking medicine he didn't believe in. After the group, I walked to the bus stop and found a message on my phone. It was from Mariah, my ex-wife. Just 3 words. "Lila has a recital." My heart kicked like it had been asleep. I typed back quickly. "When?" Her reply came after a long pause. "Friday, 6:30, school gym." I sat on the bus and stared at the screen. School gym, fluorescent lights, folding chairs, kids in paper costumes. I could picture it so clearly my chest hurt. I pictured Lila in a borrowed dress, her hair pulled back, her eyes searching the crowd. I pictured her scanning faces and not finding mine. I didn't want that. I wanted to be there. But I didn't know if I was allowed. On Friday, I showed up anyway. I wore my suit jacket even though it didn't quite fit right anymore. The school gym smelled like floor, wax, and popcorn. A Christmas tree made of green paper cutouts stood in the corner. Parents filled the bleachers. Coats piled on laps. Phones held up. I stood at the entrance, not moving. My face tight, my hands gripping the strap of a cheap tote bag, my eyes scanning for my child like a starving man scanning for bread. I saw Mariah near the front. Her hair was neatly styled. She looked like someone who had rebuilt her life with steady hands. Beside her, in the row behind, was her brother. He glanced back and saw me. His eyes narrowed. A message without words. Not welcome. I took a breath and stepped forward slowly. Mariah saw me. Her eyes widened for a second, then settled into something guarded. She stood and walked toward me, meeting me halfway like we were negotiating a border. "You came," she said. "I was invited," I said softly. She exhaled through her nose. "I didn't say you couldn't," she said, but it didn't sound like permission. It sounded like exhaustion. "I'll sit in the back," I said quickly. She nodded once. "Don't make a scene," she said. "I won't," I promised. I found a seat near the top, away from everyone. People around me glanced, then looked away. A woman whispered to the man beside her. A father in a baseball cap stared at the stage too hard, like he was trying not to see me. Pressure again. It didn't shout. It just tightened. When the kids came out, Lila was third in line. She wore a simple white shirt and black leggings. A red ribbon was tied in her hair. Her hands were clasped in front of her stomach, fingers twisting. Then she looked up. Her eyes met mine, and something in her face changed. Her mouth opened a little, like she wasn't sure her eyes were telling the truth. I lifted my hand, small. She smiled, not big, not loud, but real. Her shoulders dropped like she had been carrying something heavy, and she finally set it down. I pressed my knuckles to my mouth to keep from crying again. The performance was short. Kids sang off key. Parents clapped too hard. And for 10 minutes, my life felt like it had a place in the world. After, the gym exploded into noise. Families crowded the floor. Kids ran into arms. Photos snapped. I waited at the edge, uncertain. Lila saw me and started toward me. Then she stopped, looking at her mom. Mariah's jaw tightened, then she nodded once. Lila ran. She threw herself into me so fast my breath left my chest. I wrapped my arms around her carefully, like she was made of glass. My face pressed to her hair, my hands spread across her back, my eyes closing because the warmth was too much. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi, Peanut," I whispered back. She pulled away and looked at me closely. Her small hands came up and touched my cheek, like she was checking if I was real. "You look tired," she said. That sentence hit harder than any insult, because it was true. "I am," I said, trying to smile. "But I'm here." She nodded, serious. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "I made you something," she said. It was a drawing, a stick figure with my name above it. Beside it, a smaller stick figure holding my hand. Above us, she had drawn a big yellow circle with lines, like the sun. And in messy letters she had written, "Dad, come back." My throat closed. I held the paper like it was holy. Mariah stood a few feet away, watching. Her eyes were hard, but they were wet, too. "She's been asking," Mariah said quietly. "I know," I said. "I can't let you hurt her again," she said. "I won't," I said, and my voice shook. "I can't." Mariah looked at me for a long moment. Then she said one sentence, flat and honest. "Show her." I nodded. "I will," I said. Lila tugged my sleeve. "Can we get hot chocolate sometime?" she asked. My stomach clenched. Hot chocolate meant money. It meant stability. It meant showing up. "Yes," I said, because I needed her to hear it. "Soon." She smiled again, bright. Then she ran back to her friends. Mariah stepped closer. "Daniel," she said, and her voice softened just a fraction. "She loves you." "I love her," I said. Mariah's face tightened, like she was fighting feelings she didn't want. Then she stepped back. "Don't disappear," she said. "I won't," I whispered. On the bus ride home, I held Lila's drawing in both hands. My thumbs rubbed the edges until the paper warmed under my touch. I stared out the window at streetlights blurring through the snow, and something in me cracked open. Not hope, not yet, but a tiny, stubborn refusal to die inside. That night I opened the envelope for the first time. Inside was a cashier's check. My name is printed on it. The amount made my stomach drop, not because it was huge, because it was everything I had. Every extra shift, every night I came home with my legs aching, every time I said no to buying something warm, every time I sat in hunger and told myself it was temporary, I stared at the check until my eyes burned. Then I pulled out a small note card I had tucked in. Blank, I held the pen over it. My hand trembled, and I wrote slowly, carefully, as my life depended on it. For the heat, for the lights, for the people. I paused. Then I added the line that felt like bleeding. And for me, too. I set the note card on top of the check and slid it back into the envelope. I sealed it. I pressed the flap down hard, like sealing it could seal my heart back up. The next Sunday came with a storm. Snow fell in heavy sheets, turning the world into a muted blur. When I woke, my window was almost completely white. My first thought was, don't go. It would be easier to stay in the basement. It would be quieter. No stairs, no whispers, no closed smiles. But then I looked at Lila's drawing taped to the wall beside my bed. Dad, come back. My chest tightened, because I could already imagine what people would think. He wants attention. He's trying to buy his way back. He wants to look good. He's desperate. I could already feel the judgment before it even happened. My hands tightened around the envelope until my fingers hurt. Pastor Ewan said, if you're able to contribute, please speak to the office after service. After service, quiet, private, safe. My body begged me to stay seated. My shame begged me to stay invisible. And then, without warning, the thought came like a soft knock inside my chest. If I don't do this now, I will keep waiting for permission to live. I stood. My knees felt weak. The room was noticed. Heads turned like sunflowers following the light. A hush dropped. Not complete, but enough. I could hear my own breathing. I walked forward, step by step. The carpet was softer here, as if it wanted to keep my footsteps quiet. I didn't look left or right. I looked at the front, at the offering box near the platform, at Pastor Ewan's face, which shifted from confusion to concern. He took a small step forward. Daniel? He said, his voice low. I reached the offering box. My hand shook so hard the envelope fluttered. My face was pale, my hands were trembling as I held the envelope out, my eyes stinging like I was standing at the edge of something too big. I didn't make a speech. I couldn't. I just placed the envelope gently in the box, like laying down something fragile. Then I turned to face the room. Silence. The kind that presses on your skin. Pastor Ewan stared. A few people looked angry. A few looked confused. A few looked like they wanted to vanish. I swallowed. And then I said the only sentence I had left. I don't want to be finished, I said. My voice cracked on the last word. I stood there for 1 second longer than I could stand. Then I turned and started walking back down the aisle, because I couldn't bear to watch their faces decide what I was. Halfway down I felt it, a sob, not mine, someone else's. I didn't turn around. I kept walking, back to my seat, back to the very back where I belonged. I sat. My hands were empty now, and I felt both lighter and terrified. I stared at the floor and waited for the consequences. This is where I need you for a second. What is one moment in your life that made you feel like you were too far gone to come back? If this story is touching something in you, subscribe and stay close, because you are not alone here. Pastor Ewan's voice returned, shaky. He said my name again. "Daniel," he said. I looked up slowly. His eyes were wet. He stepped to the offering box as it might bite him, lifted the envelope, and opened it right there. The room held its breath. He pulled out the check. He read the amount. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at me, then at the note card. He read it silently, his lips moving just a little, for the heat, for the lights, for the people, and for me, too. Pastor Ewan's shoulders slumped, like he had been carrying something heavy, and finally set it down. He turned back to the room. His voice trembled. This covers it," he said. A sound moved through the sanctuary. Not cheering, not applause yet, just a collective inhale, like the room had been underwater and surfaced. A woman in the front row started crying openly. Her hands covered her face. A man beside her rubbed her back with awkward tenderness. Someone whispered, "Oh, my." Pastor Ewan looked down again, and then said one sentence that changed the air. And it came from Daniel. Silence again, but it's different now. Not the silence of judgment. The silence of being confronted by something you didn't expect. Something humbling. I wanted to disappear. My skin felt too tight. My ears rang. I stared at my hands, now resting on my knees, empty. They looked like the hands of a stranger. Pastor Ewan stepped down from the platform and walked slowly down the aisle. He stopped at my row. He crouched slightly so his eyes met mine. His voice was soft, but the whole room could hear it, because no one was breathing loudly. "Why?" he asked. I swallowed. Because if I explained too much, it would sound like a sermon. And if I explained too little, it would sound like pride. So I said the truth in the simplest words. "Because I still need a place where the lights are on," I whispered. Pastor Ewan's face crumpled. He reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. Not a formal handshake, not a cautious tap, a real hand, warm, heavy, grounding. Then he said one sentence. "We do too." He stood and looked at the room. He didn't lecture them. He didn't scold. He just let them sit in what had happened. Pastor Ewan's face crumpled. He reached out and put his hand on my shoulder. A woman in the middle section stood up slowly. Her name was Joanne. I knew it because she used to run the welcome team. She had always smelled like peppermint and hand lotion. She looked at me, her eyes shining. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "I was wrong," she said, one sentence, and her voice wobbled. She sat back down quickly, like she couldn't handle being brave for long. A man a few rows ahead stood. He was older. Gray hair, big hands. I recognized him. He used to work with me years ago. He cleared his throat and said one sentence. "I judged you from a distance." Then he sat, small sentences. But they landed like doors opening. Pastor Ewan walked back to the platform. His voice steadied. "We will finish the service," he said. He didn't make me stand. He didn't put a spotlight on me. He just kept going. And somehow that kindness felt bigger than applause. When the final song ended, people didn't rush out like they usually did. They moved slowly, like they weren't sure what to do with their hands and hearts. I stayed seated. My legs felt like they might not hold me. I watched as people gathered coats, hugged friends, and sipped the last of their coffee. A little boy ran down the aisle with a toy truck, his mother chasing him, laughing. Life. Normal life. Then a shadow fell across my row. I looked up. Mariah stood there. She shouldn't have been there. She didn't come to this church anymore. Not after the divorce. Not after everything. But there she was, hair tucked into her scarf, cheeks pink from the cold. Lila was beside her, holding her mittened hand. My heart stopped. Lila's eyes were wide. She looked at my face like she was searching for something. Then she looked at my hands, empty. Then she looked back at my face. She tilted her head. "Did you fix the lights?" she asked. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I nodded slowly. "I tried," I whispered. Mariah's eyes filled fast. She blinked hard, like she refused to cry in public, but her lips trembled anyway. Lila stepped closer. She reached out with both mittened hands and grabbed my sleeve. Her small hands gripping my jacket, my face breaking open, my eyes burning, my mouth trying to smile and failing. "Dad," she whispered, one word like a prayer. I leaned forward slightly, careful. "Hi, Peanut," I whispered back. Mariah looked around. People were watching, not in the old way, not with hungry judgment, with something softer. With curiosity, yes, but also with a strange kind of respect that made me uncomfortable. Mariah swallowed. She looked at Pastor Ewan, who had come closer. Then she looked back at me, and she said one sentence that felt like air entering my lungs after months. "Come get hot chocolate with us," I stared. I started. Money flashed through my mind. Rent, bus fare, groceries. But then I remembered the envelope. Everything I had, gone. And still, somehow, I felt like I had gained something else. Not wealth, not status, a chance. "I'd like that," I said. We walked to the church kitchen first, because Lila insisted on showing me the cookie table. She grabbed my hand and pulled. Her mitten was warm from her palm. My fingers closed around it slowly, like I was relearning how to hold something without fear. In the kitchen, the smell of baked goods was thick: sugar, butter, cinnamon. A woman poured coffee. Someone laughed softly. Joanne approached, hesitating. She held a plate of cookies with both hands like an offering. She looked at me and said one sentence. "I saved you the good ones." Her eyes darted down, then back up, as if she couldn't handle direct contact for long. I swallowed. "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded small. She nodded and walked away fast. Pastor Ewan stood near the sink, watching the room like he was taking inventory of a miracle. He stepped closer to me, not too close, and said one sentence. "Can we meet this week?" I nodded. "Yes," I said. He didn't talk about steps. He didn't talk about rules. Not yet. He just said, "Good," and walked away like he was giving me space to breathe. Outside, the storm had eased. Snow still fell, but softer, like feathers. Mariah, Lila, and I walked to a small cafe across the street because Lila demanded the kind with whipped cream. The cafe was warm and crowded, windows fogged from breath. The barista wore a reindeer headband that kept slipping sideways. We found a small table near the window. Lila climbed into the chair and swung her legs. Mariah sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her cup. I held mine too, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. My face reflected in the fogged window, my hands wrapped around a cup, my eyes watching my daughter smile like it might disappear. Lila sipped and got whipped cream on her upper lip. Mariah reached over and wiped it with a napkin, gentle. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were searching again, not judging, searching. "Are you okay?" she asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to unload everything, the loneliness, the shame. The nights I stared at the ceiling and wondered if my name was erased somewhere. But I remembered the rules of the moment. Keep it real. Keep it simple. So I said the truth in one sentence. I'm trying to learn how to stay. Mariah nodded. Her lips pressed together like she was holding back a flood. Lila leaned forward. Stay for my birthday, she said, one sentence like a command. My chest tightened. When is it? I asked. Next month, she said. And I want you there. I'll be there, I said, and I knew I was promising more than a date. I was promising a different kind of man. When we left the cafe, Lila tucked her hand into mine without asking. The snow squeaked under our boots. Cars hissed through slush. The world felt ordinary again, and that was the strangest part, because ordinary life had felt impossible. A week later, I sat in Pastor Yuan's office again. Same chair, same desk, different air. This time he didn't start with how have you been. Like a form, he started with silence. He let me breathe. He let me fidget. He let me be human. Then he said one sentence. I'm sorry we made you feel like a stain. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My eyes stung. He kept going, gentle. We had fear, he said, and we called it wisdom. I stared at my hands. They were clasped so tight my knuckles hurt. My face reflected in the fogged window, my hands wrapped around a cup, my eyes watching my daughter smile like it might disappear. Lila sipped and got whipped cream on her upper lip. Mariah reached over and wiped it with a napkin, gentle. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were searching again. Not judging, searching. Are you okay? She asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to unload everything. The loneliness, the shame. The nights I stared at the ceiling and wondered if my name was erased somewhere. But I remembered the rules of the moment. Keep it real. Keep it simple. So I said the truth in one sentence. I'm trying to learn how to stay. Mariah nodded. Her lips pressed together like she was holding back a flood. Lila leaned forward. Stay for my birthday, she said, one sentence like a command. My chest tightened. When is it? I asked. Next month, she said. And I want you there. I'll be there, I said, and I knew I was promising more than a date. I was promising a different kind of man. When we left the cafe, Lila tucked her hand into mine without asking. The snow squeaked under our boots. Cars hissed through slush. The world felt ordinary again, and that was the strangest part, because ordinary life had felt impossible. A week later, I sat in Pastor Yuan's office again. Same chair, same desk, different air. This time he didn't start with how have you been. Like a form, he started with silence. He let me breathe. He let me fidget. He let me be human. Then he said one sentence. I'm sorry we made you feel like a stain. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My eyes stung. He kept going, gentle. We had fear, he said, and we called it wisdom. I stared at my hands. They were clasped so tight my knuckles hurt. My head bowed, my hands locked, my face breaking as tears pooled and refused to fall. I did wrong, I whispered. Yes, he said simply, you did. No softening, no excuses. Just the truth. And somehow that honesty felt like kindness, too. He leaned forward slightly. But you're still here, he said. I swallowed. Sometimes I wish I wasn't, I admitted. He didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly. I believe God keeps people breathing for reasons, he said. There it was, a line that could have turned into preaching, but he didn't push it. He just let it sit like a candle in a dark room. We talked about the steps again, but this time the steps didn't sound like punishment. They sounded like a path. We talked about accountability, about serving quietly again in time, about rebuilding trust, not buying it. We talked about meeting with a small group of men who had once respected me and now didn't know what to do with my story. We talked about my daughter. Pastor Ewan listened, not like a manager, like a man who remembered I was a person. When I left his office, the hallway felt less like a courtroom. The next Sunday, I sat in the back again. But this time, Joanne waved at me, small, quick, like she was learning too. A teenage boy walked past and nodded. A man I didn't know held the door open for me without hesitation. Little things. But little things were what my life was built on now. After service, I helped stack chairs in the basement. No spotlight, no announcement, just work. The chairs were cold metal under my palms. The sound of them scraping the floor was oddly soothing. A woman approached with her hands in her pockets. She looked nervous. "I'm Carla," she said, one sentence. I nodded. "Daniel," I said. She swallowed. "My brother, he's in recovery," she said, and her voice shook. "He thinks God hates him." I froze. This was dangerous ground. This was where people expected me to preach. But I didn't have sermons. I had bruises. So I said the simplest thing I knew. "Tell him to stay," I said, one sentence. Her eyes filled. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered. And she walked away, wiping her face quickly, like tears were embarrassing. Weeks passed. Not magically, not smoothly. I still had bills. I still had nights where loneliness sat beside me like a person. I still had moments where I walked into a room and felt the air shift because someone remembered. But now I had other moments too. A phone call from Lila that lasted longer than 2 minutes. A text from Mariah that didn't sound like a warning. A part-time job at a warehouse that turned into more shifts because I showed up on time and didn't complain. I didn't tell anyone at church about the job at first. Not because it was secret, because I was afraid of hope. Hope felt like a thing that could be taken. But the job paid. Slowly, I caught up. Rent first, then child support. Then groceries without counting coins so tightly. One Friday night, Lila came over for the first time in almost a year. Mariah dropped her off at the house where I rented the basement room. Mariah's eyes flicked over the place. Low ceiling, small bed, a folding table, a space heater. It wasn't a home, not really, but it was something. Lila walked down the stairs and looked around. She didn't judge. She just smiled. "It smells like soup," she said. I laughed softly. "It is soup," I said. She nodded, pleased, like soup meant safety. We sat at the little table and ate. Lila told me about school, about a girl who always borrowed pencils, about a boy who made funny faces during math. I listened like every word was water. After dinner, she pulled out her drawing supplies. She sat on the floor, legs crossed, tongue sticking out slightly as she focused. I watched her, my hands resting on my knees, afraid to move too fast and break the moment. My face soft into the glow of the lamp, my hands still, my eyes fixed on my daughter's small fingers, moving with quiet confidence. When she finished, she held up a new drawing. It was the church, a square building with a cross. a big yellow sun above it, and in front of it a stick figure with my name. This time the stick figure wasn't alone. There were other stick figures around it, smiling. Lila looked up at me. "I drew you back," she said, one sentence like it was a fact. My throat tightened. "You did," I whispered. That night, after Mariah picked her up, I stood in the basement doorway and watched their car disappear down the street. Snow fell lightly. Streetlights glowed. I went back inside and sat on the bed. The room was quiet, but it wasn't empty anymore. I pulled out my notebook and flipped to the page where I had written that line months ago. "God is not done with me." I stared at it. Then I wrote another line beneath it. "Maybe I'm not done either." The next Sunday, Pastor Ewan invited me to stand at the very end of the service, not to speak long, not to perform repentance for the room, just to be seen. My stomach twisted when he asked, but I said yes. When the time came, I walked up slowly. I stood beside him, hands clasped in front of me. The lights were bright. Faces stared. My heart was hammered. Pastor Ewan said a few words about second chances and community. Then he turned slightly and looked at me. "Daniel," he said, "is there anything you want to say?" My throat went dry. I didn't want to give a speech. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to become a story people used to feel good about themselves, so I kept it simple. I looked at the room and said one sentence. "Thank you for letting me breathe here again." Silence. Then something unexpected, but not a twist. A small sound. Applause. Not wild, not loud, but real. Hands clapping like people were choosing a different ending. I blinked hard. I looked down at my own hands. They were trembling, but they were open. Afterward, Joanne hugged me quickly, like ripping off a bandage. A man I had once avoided shook my hand and didn't look away. Carla told me her brother wanted to come to a meeting with Ron. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized something. God hadn't been finished with me. People had just been afraid. And so had I. Spring came late. Snow lingered in dirty piles in parking lots, but the sun stayed longer. The church lights still came on every Sunday, and each time I walked in, I remembered the first day I had stood on the steps and couldn't move. Sometimes I still felt that old heaviness. It didn't vanish. It just stopped driving. One evening, months later, I stood outside the church after a midweek meeting. The sky was clear. The air smelled like thawed earth. The parking lot was mostly empty. I watched as the last few people climbed into cars and drove away. Pastor Ewan locked the door and stood beside me. He looked out at the streetlights, quiet. Then he said one sentence. "I'm glad you didn't leave." I swallowed. "Me too," I said. He nodded. And we stood there, two men under a wide sky, breathing cold air like it was a gift. When I got home that night, I found Lila's latest drawing taped to my fridge. Mariah must have dropped it off earlier. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, me, Lila, and Mariah. Above us, in messy letters, Lila had written, "Not finished." I pressed my palm flat against the paper. My hand covered the word, and I could feel the warmth of my own skin through it. My face close to the drawing, my hand spread on the page, my eyes wet, my mouth smiling without trying. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, not performing, not proving, just existing. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. God is not finished with people who are still breathing. What part of your story have you been afraid to bring back into the light? If you want more stories that feel like a hand on your shoulder in the dark, subscribe, and stay with me.